entrepreneurial economies that are moving really fast are kind of tied to certain sectors, not exclusively, but I would characterize them as centers of gravity.
Imagine you're the CEO of Cintrifuse.
Pete Blackshaw, CEO of Cintrifuse, Greater Cincinnati's regional catalyst.
In your hands lies the challenge of transforming a city known for retail, fintech, health, and logistics into a glowing beacon of startup innovation.
2 words: connect and catalyze.
Aligning corporations, government, and startups towards a common goal.
What is the focus of this new incubator in the Midwest that wants to stand out and be different, yet wants everyone to see value in it right away?
Yeah, great question. In taking this job, I was given this very unique challenge.
Now imagine the complexities that lie ahead. The shifting startup ecosystem, the rising tide of AI, and the delicate dance of pairing big corporations with nimble startups.
100% of net new job growth is going to come from startups and small businesses.
You're leveraging these strengths to pivot Cincinnati towards a greener future.
And we're doing all that right here in Cincinnati.
This is the story of Pete Blackshaw, CEO of Cintrifuse. And this is The Catalyst.
Welcome to Top CEO. I'm chatting with Pete Blackshaw, CEO of Cintrifuse. And Pete, when you came on the job and you're looking to make a name for what Cincinnati really is, you had a lot of choices. You could just say, let's just be, if you've got a startup and you want to grow it, come here. You could sort of be general. Or you could be incredibly specific. You ended up going with a more specific route. What were you thinking, and what were the pressures you were facing at that time, trying to figure out what is the focus of this new incubator in the Midwest that wants to stand out and be different, yet wants everyone to see value in it right away?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I was recruited into this job after spending 8 years leading digital marketing and digital innovation at Nestle. And in taking this job, I was given this very unique challenge, which drew me to the job, which was to help make Greater Cincinnati the #1 startup hub in the Midwest and a top innovation center in the country. And so when you have a kind of a step change remit like that, you really have to take a step back and ask, like, what is really going to move the needle? And you can't be incrementalism. And I concluded really quickly that a concentration of talent, technology, and capital in certain areas will drive disproportionate or outsize advantage. And what I mean by that, if you look across, the United States or even outside the United States, you'll see that certain entrepreneurial economies that are moving really fast are kind of tied to certain sectors, not exclusively, but I would characterize them as centers of gravity. They give focus.
Well, and I'll give you one where I'm originally from Oregon, and because in Oregon it's the birthplace of Nike. Then you have Adidas USA locating there because they're going to share a talent pool. You have other sportswear companies like Columbia Sportswear making winter coats and ski jackets there. And it starts to have a little bit of a hub, but it's sort of difficult to create that, right? Unless there's raw ingredients there, you can kind of shape it, but it almost needs that. It's hard to just be like, yep, we're going to be, from this moment forward, we're this. But yet, sort of your job was kind of to do that, right? But take into account the resources you had. Yeah,
it's a good example. I mean, sports tech begets sports tech, right? You kind of create this whole, ecosystem. So I looked around and asked myself, like, well, what are those strengths? And I quickly kind of gravitated around 4 areas. One, kind of future branding and retail, because Kroger and P&G, Kroger's, I think the 3rd largest grocery retailer in the world. P&G is the world's biggest advertiser. And so to some extent, like, figuring out the future of branding and retail is almost a no-brainer, just given those businesses.
Okay, you got 2 massive companies in your backyard. They're in the same space. Sure.
You have to figure that out. And then connected health, really strong health foundations, whether it's UC, which has gotten a lot of attention recently because
University of Cincinnati. Okay, sure.
the role that they played, with the the recent kind of football incident, and then so connected health, big opportunity, a lot of incumbent strengths there. Fintech, we have a lot of banks and insurance companies. I would almost put that into the disrupt or be disrupted. You can't afford not to. I think fintech is about 25% of all venture capital raised. So you have to play there. But I would say some of that's almost for defensive reasons because you just simply, a lot of these fintechs are trying to put the big companies out of business. And then the third area was supply chain and logistics. And what I quickly learned as I got to the region is that, greater Cincinnati, northern Kentucky, it's a bit of a great supply way to the world. It's really, we're now the home to Amazon Prime. We're one of the top hubs for DHL. I think we're actually the number one e-commerce hub in the country, which kind of gives it a really interesting supply chain element. And so started with those four areas. And then post-pandemic, I was asked to chair a committee on kind of the future of supply chains, and the whole issue of supply chain resilience was a really relevant topic in the wake of COVID. So I chaired a committee with all the big companies and a number of startup leaders. And what was interesting is we charted out kind of the future of supply chains. We kind of broke out the committee into three different buckets. One was tech, future of freight. The second was food from seed to plate. And the third one was circular economy and zero waste. And what was interesting is that about 80% of the recos that committee came up with were about sustainability. I mean, literally carbon neutral last mile delivery. Kroger's trying to figure out the future of fresh. And so localized supply chains are really, really important. And then everyone is trying to figure out how to reduce the carbon footprint through circularity, or taking waste out of the system. And so the big aha that went in my head was like, oh my gosh, this is an area where there's obviously a huge need. The supply chain strength is also the green strength. And then I started to look around at all the ESG reports and consumer promises from all the companies. I'm like, oh my gosh, like everybody has to win here. So let's kind of take that and turn it into a growth opportunity. And I mean, it's a little bit tricky because it's not like you're ruling out other sectors, but that you're sort of saying, hey, this is where we're going to plant a flag. And, we're even going to try to convince my friends in Silicon Valley or Boulder or other kind of green hubs that this understated, underappreciated region in the Midwest can actually be a leader here. And what I realized is that we actually have quite a few advantages. I quickly learned that we were rated the most sustainable city in the country, even ahead of some of these other cities, largely based on how we were thinking about new builds. So if you look at the new buildings that are going up, incredibly progressive in terms of net zero targets, the way the buildings are made. And so my thought was, okay, let's just double down on this. Let's do it really well. Let's get close to the big companies and figure out, okay, as you think about your 5-year plans, 10-year plans, what role could a startup economy play there? And yeah, I think everybody's kind of bought in and we're off to the races. And we're certainly thinking a lot about with all, there's $1 trillion in federal money that's coming down across these three big acts: infrastructure, chips and science, and the IRA, which is basically a climate tech act. So the question is, how can our region, in our effort to shine a light around the future of sustainability, partner with the government to get there faster? At the end of the day, they're really trying to find are there hubs within the United States that can really lead and get ahead and set a new standard for industrial policy. So that's where I think this is really interesting, but there's definitely trade-offs. And I think, but you have to focus to win, full stop.
Well, and so how does that go from, an idea to, it's interesting because for Cintrifuse, it's maybe there's a large number of stakeholders that you have to align and get on board. Some would say, more pessimistically, that's like herding cats. Others, people would maybe be more optimistic about it. But how do you get what you need when you have, big funders of what you're doing, like the Procter and Gamble's and Kroger's. You got government officials that have their own, ideas, their own agenda. You have the startups themselves. You have other players just geographically, chambers of commerce, development, all of that. How do you get them aligned?
I mean, it's a great question. And what's been interesting about this job is that it's really combined my experience in public policy, marketing, and brand management. And I mean, there's actually quite a bit of policy in it. And I started my career working in the California legislature before I went to HBS, and that's really kind of come in handy. But yeah, there's a lot of coalition building, but I think all leaders have to, I'm a big future back thinker, which means that sometimes it's easier to see the world, 10 years out than it is tomorrow. I think there's a lot of noise in the present that really makes it very, very difficult to see possibilities. And so I try to think about, okay, what could that article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal look like in 5 years related to Cincinnati being a green leader? And it's much easier to build a coalition around that outcome. So one of the things I sometimes I'll do precisely that. I'll write the article 5 years out and sort of script it out from if we do this, this is kind of the outcome. And I did the same thing at Nestle. I did a lot of 5-10 year forecasting on future of food, future of digital within food. But you have to help your constituencies see the possibilities. And it's a little bit risky, honestly. I mean, throughout my career, I've always lived that tension of being the leader that's too far out there versus the practical, how are you going to sell cases tomorrow? And it's a good tension. I mean, but in this role, you really have to help people see around corners and understand that they may have strengths that they may not realize, or they may have promises to shareholders that they just haven't quite processed. So companies like Kroger, for example, they're going to have to get beyond plastics. They're going to have to think about circularity just to be competitive. And then it's hey, they can go outside of Cincinnati to find those partners to get there, or we can think ahead and actually build a startup economy around that. With universities, I just had several meetings just now. I mean, I think the universities that figure out the green space are going to get way ahead of the marketplace. I think they're going to get more federal dollars. Look at John Doerr giving Stanford $1.1 billion. Mostly because they decided to create a progressive school of sustainability. So I do think there's going to be rewards of leadership, and I'm trying to help all the different stakeholders see that. And I may miserably fail, but I'm reasonably confident that really important things are going to come out of it. So I'll give you an example how we brought the city into it. And this is really interesting. My team has done a brilliant job of working with the city of Cincinnati, almost thinking about the city as a lab. I do think cities are really important sources of innovation, and the problems that they need to solve could cascade in a lot of directions. So we were brought in to basically lead the nation's first ever hack on litter, which was the number one pain point with residents, cutting across all economic lines. And it was a huge success. We ended up coming up with a number of startup ideas. We got a couple of them funded. We thought about digitalization meets trash, you name it. Now we're going deep on recycling. But it's not just how do we work with P&G, it's how do we work with the city? How do we bring, the corporates into that model? And so, but you've almost got to figure out, Ben, you almost there's something in it for everybody. And even, even some that are on the, this is a very polarizing issue, even in the Midwest, states like Ohio. And, I work really hard to even help skeptical Republicans. I mean, my job is nonpartisan, but to understand that, hey, your business interests, your desire to get that Intel plant up in Ohio is inseparable from a sustainable future, because any business that wants to move here is looking favorably at Ohio because of, climate reasons. And so you just have to be really smart about how you position it.
Skill for CEOs or any leaders to be able to understand someone's or some organization's motivation, right? To actually understand what is driving this, being able to understand it quickly and being able to, move people and organizations and things that are entrenched by understanding how motivations can align and what drives things and sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not obvious and sometimes you have an organization that's one way, but you got a new leadership coming up that might think a little bit differently and might be open to your ideas. But this idea of being able to kind of ascertain, and kind of the old, since you used to work in politics, the old adage was where you stand is based on where you sit, or where and so how do you do that and do it in a way that enables. If you work for an accelerator, your job is to accelerate. So how do you accelerate? How do you, this sounds great, but Pete is going to take 20 years to do, how do you do in 2 what would take 20?
So the big piece, and I would say this is probably my most important leadership skill, even when I was leading back then interactive marketing at Procter and then digital at Nestle and now at Cintrifuse. You have to embrace urgent optimism. And it's such an important skill because, innovators like us, we see possibilities. I mean, we just, and possibilities kind of speak to the optimism that, hey, there's value to be created. And there's just like no question that an area like sustainability is, the opportunities under that tent are just absolutely massive, unlimited, maybe too wide. But the other part is the urgency, and this is critical. And it's a little bit, it's not just FOMO, it's the sense that, you reap the upside if you act now, or you start the planning now, or you stake the claim now. It's a little bit of competitive pressure. It's a bit of paranoia that other states or regions may get there first, and you don't want to scare people away. You don't want to sound like the boy who cried wolf, but it's that combination of urgency and optimism that I think helps to really move the needle. It certainly has for me. And again, I don't want to, I may crash and burn for all I know, but I believe that it has made a big difference in getting different stakeholders to see the possibilities. And even as we think about federal grants in the U.S. industrial policy, there's a real opportunity cost of not moving fast, full stop. So don't seek perfection. See the possibilities, but don't miss the boat.
And how much do you think, just an aside, because how much do you think some of this somewhat either pandemic fueled or corporate sort of regulation, government regulation fueled exodus of Silicon Valley and San Francisco, which still people can leave it still kind of light years ahead of other cities, but still the fact that venture capitalists are not asking companies like, no, pick up where you are and come to Silicon Valley. You need to be here. You just can't be part. That is a little bit of an outdated mentality that you would have heard 10 years ago, but it isn't there now. How much does that create an opportunity for other places to have these sort of to become a locus of influence in a particular sector?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic point. I mean, I think for a while we were just kind of considered flyover country. And I think post-COVID, everybody's thinking differently about where to work and where to live. I mean, the reality is it's just a fantastic quality of life in the Midwest. And I'm saying this as someone who has lived the good life in Southern California, Pasadena, went to school on the southern tip of Silicon Valley and UC Santa Cruz, and am kind of blown away at what the Midwest offers. I think we sometimes kind of stereotype the Midwest in a very elitist way, but in fact, there's a real competitive advantage of being here. There's a high quality of life, and I've even been thinking in the wake of all the tech disruption just in the last couple of weeks, is that an opportunity for us to relocate a lot of startups, a lot of engineers, a lot of greenies who maybe think San Francisco is too expensive, to move out here and join our revolution. And so absolutely. And I do think COVID was a horrible thing, but it led to a bit of a different mindset in terms of, I definitely think it's sped up innovation at a remarkable rate, but it also changed a lot of perceptions about, again, where to live, where to work.
There are these moments where, for a certain industry, a technology, a location, where suddenly everyone sees the possibilities. Suddenly everyone sees the potential. It's like, oh, wow, this can be big, right? And so we've had kind of a moment like that recently. Well, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, and actually, I was gonna lead you into ChatGPT just because I think it's an example of when something is simple, surprising, and significant in a way that it can crystallize what is essentially a technology that's been developing. It's been there. People who understand artificial intelligence have known that the kinds of things that people are seeing it can do now are possible. But something in the simple, surprising, significant way that it all came together to say, wow, this can answer questions about anything in any format. And, at its best, be an answer you can use right away. And if not, maybe be like a C- college essay that you could revise. So what is it like that? What are your thoughts on ChatGPT? And what are your thoughts on like just crystallizing a technology or a sector to where suddenly everyone gets it?
Yeah. ChatGPT is kind of interesting because I just had led a whole workshop with my team on it just to really internalize like what's going on, a little bit of chat, AI 101, but I also brought in a panel of experts, and it was a really super important conversation. One of the things I said was, for me personally, I've been studying technology my entire life, and I'd say before ChatGPT, the single biggest slap me in the face tech awakening was discovering the Mosaic browser. That was just a game-changing experience. It kind of changed my life. I think after I saw it, I was at HBS. I ended up ran down to the student newspaper and I started writing a column called The Surf Report. And it was almost my way of forcing myself to kind of think about what was going on. And I've seen a lot of really interesting waves in my career, but the ChatGPT thing just, slapped me in the face like nothing I've experienced. And yeah, it's a disruption at many, many different levels. It is kind of like coming of age. It's the consumerization of AI, which up until now had always been like this abstract concept. We kind of knew that it was working in the background, but now you've got this, this really, really sticky app that is becoming, and I think Google and everybody's kind of in denial of this, but it is becoming the next search. And it's, despite some of the debates over, is it perfect? Debates we always had with Wikipedia, right? Oh my gosh, they got something wrong. But it's marching down the path of the North Star of truth. And at a time when consumers are just frustrated as all hell with the noise and the interruption, the web's still a bit of a cesspool of noise. And so now you've got this elegant tool that kind of gives you a single response that's pretty damn good and is only going to get better. Yeah, that's a massive disruption. And on top of that, looking at it through my consumer lens, and as someone who's working with startups all the time, I've been trying to ask myself, at the end of the day, when you're helping startups, it's like helping the underdog. You're trying to figure out, how do you help that person who has very little cash, may not have been tapped by the VC to get that extra advantage. And what I've been obsessed with is ChatGPT is a great way to write concepts, develop that minimally viable concept. You can both get feedback from it and you can kind of develop the product. And and then kind of inform all sorts of other expertise. I mean, I'm kind of amazed at how well it answers startup questions, and it's generally right. But yeah, just thinking about like, how do you reinvent the journey of a startup, especially the startup that doesn't have a lot of money, and could that change certain outcomes? I mean, I think about the green space. I've been obsessed with, there's a lot of great, green ideas out that folks haven't thought about yet. Carbon analytics. I'm like shocked that industry isn't more developed. I mean, why don't we have apps where you can literally get a carbon footprint when you go into a grocery store? And I'm kind of optimistic that tools like ChatGPT are going to allow us to basically identify that long tail of ideas and kind of take them to market a lot faster. And I'm going to be in a better position to add value to those startups on that journey in many more kind of creative ways. I think the other thing I would say is that I wrote an article in Ad Age just 2 weeks ago that has created a bit of a swirl, but I'm absolutely stand by my claim. I said, ChatGPT is going to be a very rude awakening for brands, especially in impact areas. And so if you go to ChatGPT and you ask it about a brand and its diversity level, or a brand and how well it's meeting its sustainability commitment or its carbon footprint, it's brutally honest. And it is like a total greenwashing bullshit detector. And people may say that's not fair, that's not true. But if you look at the answer and then you study the science, you'd say, I don't know how that black box worked, but you know what? It's right on. And what I'm trying to train entrepreneurs to do is take that, the best ideas, startup ideas start with vulnerability. Like, where does the brand have a gap? Where does the business have a need? And historically, we'll go and talk to the companies and say, what are your needs and business challenges? And you might get the answer. But I think algorithms can also go right to the source of where there may be an unmet need. And what I'm trying to do is train entrepreneurs to use AI to better understand the customer, especially on the complicated issues. And I think that's a potential breakthrough. It's not like you push a button. I think there's method behind it. And that's where I'm kind of putting my, what is the method? How can I add value? How can my world of experience go into that method? But this is an absolute watershed moment. I've never seen anything like this.
And I think one of the things that's interesting is, you would have, you could look at a tool like a calculator, right? Where it used to be like, okay, if we're going to take a math test, you can't have a calculator. Why? Because, it will just do work for you. Then you don't have to do it. And we're kind of at that point now with AI. Like, is it just going to do work for us? But at a certain point, you move along in math, things advance, and you're like, they require you to have a calculator in the class. You can't do anything. You can't go further unless you have a calculator, because to do more advanced things, it handles the basic things so that you can do the things that actually only you can do. And so there's this natural reaction to sort of say, the first wave is, well, are people going to cheat on tests? Are people going to not do their work and write memos that are based on this? But the wave that comes later is, does this, and it sounds like you're saying, yes, does this just become table stakes where it's a tool that you use and you have to use it because you can't actually be as productive or efficient or effective or do your job unless you can use it well, which, by the way, is not unlike probably doing a Google search now, to sort of take your browser example and bring it further. Pretty hard to be like, you're going to work in the world and you don't know how to search for things online. That's going to be difficult.
Yeah, no. Yeah, listen, there's a lot of really tricky, complicated questions that are sitting in front of us. And I think, there's really important leadership challenges. I think, CEOs can play a really important role in helping everyone to understand, how, ChatGPT or AI can be a powerful vitamin, not kind of a job killer or there will be some disruptions. There will be some industries that just are, we've seen this waves all the time in technology, but we'll need to really think about how the capability opens up new opportunities. I know that almost sounds like a kind of a bit of a cliche, but but yeah, that's always been like the riddle of technology. It's kind of, there's always like some inherent displacement, but it also opens up a lot of possibilities. And right now I'm kind of in opportunity mode. How do you turn that into, I like the notion of co-pilot. I think that's a really good metaphor. And I was even in my session with my team yesterday, I said, hey, I want you to think more about partner, not replacement. And I think if you kind of have that mindset, we can kind of get through some of these more, some of these trickier questions. But we need to be eyes wide open on the complicated part. And we need to be empathetic to those who are fearful of, where this could all go. And I think those are really legitimate issues. And I think CEOs of the future are going to have to be very empathetic on all the downside dynamics around technology.
And to wrap up, what you interact with a lot of early stage CEOs, some later stage CEOs too. What is the difference, in your opinion, between the people who are going to make it and a lot of people aren't? What stands out to you when you kind of have a job that is a front row seat to a lot of entrepreneurship and growth, or fast flame outs too?
Yeah, I think the biggest, if I just think about like our region, like what is really going to help us move the needle from, a great early stage startup to a scalable business, I think it's the experienced founder who brings, the operational skills for just high velocity growth. And that's tricky. And there's some aspects of that I dare say I'm not qualified to do. I'm probably more on the early side of, rally kind of a founding team and get it to a certain level. But I wouldn't say that I'm, Mr. Operational. But I do think that, but I'm looking for those types of folks. I mean, who are the folks that have kind of built businesses? I even think about, are there folks that have had experience in some of the big companies that might play a role? Sometimes it's good to get the people from the big companies that have kind of had a startup experience. So you've got this blend, but they can be the folks that can kind of take a growth stage startup to the next level. And at the early stage, yeah, you're going to have a little bit more evangelism, idealism, kind of visionary types. And what I'm trying to figure out is just, how do you nurture all corners of it? Even how do you nurture that founder to realize at some point you need to let go and let somebody scale the model? It's not always easy. Okay. Well, yeah.
And what is the future like for startups and big companies and groups like Cintrifuse and government agencies working together? What is the future like for that, and is there a change coming in how those groups can come together?
I certainly hope so. I mean, we have three priorities: one, attract talent and capital to the region; two, try to scale the next unicorn, who's going to be the next Kroger or P&G. And the third one is probably the most important, which is like, how do you make the local startups like the first point of entry for the big co's for their innovation needs? And that one's tricky because, I mean, as much as I've romanticized startup, big co collaboration, it's really hard. These companies are built for scale. There are risk factors of partnering with, a mom and pop tech startup. And so, we've really been thinking hard about how do we drive that marriage between the startup and the big co need. Big credit to my boss. He heads up growth at P&G, guy named Guy Prasad, and he's really been helping us think through a strategy where we can take those startup opportunities and marry them with the big co needs. Now, there are some areas, and this kind of takes us full circle to the first part of our conversation about making that choice. One additional reason that I didn't mention about why sustainability is so important. It's not just that we can lead, but that's an urgency catalyst. There are certain types of issues where I believe you can open up the door faster and with less bureaucracy. I would even put diversity in that category. I do think companies are waking up to the reality of diversity and inclusion. And I think they are writing new rules, overdue rules. I think they're decalcifying processes to get that right. And I think you're seeing the same thing in sustainability. There are really urgent deadlines there. And I'm trying to figure out how to use the urgency catalyst to reinvent new processes that might benefit all the different areas, but there's always going to be certain areas where you're just going to get the meeting faster, and there may be more of a creative resolve to kind of get there. And so that's, but getting that, creating that flywheel with the startups who kind of open up, unlock the innovation with the big co needs is the hardest part of my job, but it's also the most thrilling, because if I can crack that code, if I can solve that riddle, boy, that's going to be a great thing to look back on when I, reflect on career accomplishments.
We have navigated through a strategic vision, boldly capitalizing on Cincinnati's inherent strengths. We've peered into the heart of sustainability, identifying a unique growth opportunity amid an existential challenge. Delving into the art of aligning diverse stakeholders and sharing a collective vision for Cincinnati as a green leader, setting an inspiring example for cities globally. We were also reminded of the critical role of urgent optimism, an energy source that fuels innovation and startup success. The conversation then ventured into the realms of AI. Pete urged us to reframe our perspectives and see AI as a co-pilot, a powerful vitamin, and an opportunity for profound advancements, rather than a harbinger of job loss. We dove into the heart of entrepreneurship, discussing the quintessential qualities needed for scaling startups, the crucial importance of operational skills, and the invaluable role of experienced founders in fostering high-velocity growth. Finally, we acknowledge that we're in an era of rewriting rules, of embracing diversity and sustainability. Pete challenged us not to see these as burdens, but as urgency catalysts that can fast-track innovation and unlock unprecedented potential. So, as we wrap up, let's take away not just the insights, but also the bold optimism, the daring vision, and the audacious commitment to a sustainable future. Today, we've peeked into the future through Pete's eyes, and it's looking greener, smarter, and more collaborative. And with that, it's case closed.